Our guest today on Sports Scene is Steve Bull, a former Western Hockey Leaguer who played 2 seasons with the Kamloops Blazers from 1981 to 83. Steve represents Together We Can, which helps people dealing with addictions. He played in Kamloops at the ages of 18 and 19. A lot of water has passed under the bridge in the past 35 years, and really, this is not a pretty story, but its success is being monitored daily. Steve is a recovering addict, so let's start with how did it happen? How long did it go on?
Rick, thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity to speak today. My story is an ugly one, to be honest with you, and there was a time that I was extremely ashamed and embarrassed to share it with people. That's not who I am today. I left home at 15 years of age to play in the Alberta Junior Hockey League and was extremely homesick. Back then, they didn't have the draft in the WHL. They had the protected list, and the Lethbridge Broncos owned my rights. And so I had no choice. If I wanted to play junior hockey, I had to play in Alberta. I started using alcohol as a coping mechanism then to deal with that. Part of my story is that I was so homesick that I took a hammer to my foot and I smashed my foot. I did that drunk in order to fake an injury like it happened on the ice, and I was sent home for an operation on my foot. That stalled my development as a hockey player then, and obviously some psychological issues that went on with that. The next year I showed up at training camp and was in great shape and had a great training camp. The team already knew that there was some issues, I think. There was an incident due to alcohol after the season had started. It's a significant one, and Brent Sutter actually ended up writing a check for it, as he was a player that had just been drafted in the first round by the Islanders back then, and or Steve Bull would have been sent home then. My journey continued on, and I was eventually traded from there because I was more trouble than I was worth, and I was down to Spokane. Spokane tried to trade me to Billings, and then I ended up back to Spokane, and because they couldn't make a deal, and I ended up in Kamloops. And I was sent home when Ronnie Harris was the coach with about 6 or 7 games left in the season as an 18-year-old because of an incident that happened in Victoria. Then I made a deal with Bill LaForge in the summer. I wanted to be traded, and I was going to try a geographical change and go to Ontario and play in the OHL. Bill LaForge made a deal with me that if I didn't drink alcohol, he'd give me an opportunity in Kamloops. I drank alcohol, I just didn't drink it out in public. I had a decent year with LaForge. And Dean Evanson was my center iceman, and we had a pretty good year. And I broke my leg that year as well, but came back too early. Bill, when the year they went to the Memorial Cup, wanted me to come back as an overage. I've always regretted it. They went to the Memorial Cup, and Doug Saunders was one of the overages. And when he was let go, he gave me the opportunity to come back, and I didn't take it because I knew I couldn't stay away from drinking, and that would have been a requirement to be there.
Steve, at this point, you were a closet drinker, were you not?
Yeah, if I drank, there was things that fell out of the sky and hit me. There was always things I couldn't control the amount or the frequency I drank. So when I started, I always drank excessively.
Is it a peer pressure situation for young players at that age? And do they wind up dragging others along with them?
And that might have been the case for some people. It just wasn't part of my story. Nobody made me drink, or nobody influenced me to drink. If anything, I was the one who influenced other people to drink. My family was completely unaware of the problem by this point. My hockey career, I don't think I was ever really good enough to carry it on. I have no illusions of grandeur as far as my hockey career goes, but it shouldn't have ended like it did, and my junior hockey career shouldn't have had so many blemishes on it by those kinds of things.
What kinds of things along the way have you been able to do to kind of patch things up and get your life back on track?
Well, I'm just recently turned 54 years old, and as I was telling you earlier, Rick, my story is ugly. So fast forward, I was married. I went to school for business, got a diploma, and I was able to run a successful home, and it was different times. I ran a successful business as well. I was deemed a high-income earner, and life was pretty good through my 20s. But I still drank a lot on weekends, and I played recreational hockey and stuff with some ex-guys from the WHL and things like that. By the time I was 30, my ex-wife didn't want to live like that anymore, and the marriage dissolved. When that happened, took off those restraints because I was essentially a weekend warrior up to that point, to my 30s. By the time she left and the kids I was no longer living in the family home, I was a divorced father, and I really didn't attribute it to alcohol. There was other substances starting to creep into my life then, being cocaine. kept me sober when I did it. Then it developed even more, the cocaine. I went to my first treatment center actually when I was 32 years of age. I've been to treatment 7 times. It got to the point in my story where I was homeless eventually. I've been homeless on more than one occasion in the sense that I've recovered, went to treatment, got healthy, obtained a good job again. I've gravitated to working in the oil sands and things like that, in sales, in business, and done quite well, only to relapse on alcohol and then other substances creep back in my life, being cocaine again, and burn my life essentially to the ground again. And then I would be homeless for a period of time. The longest stint I was homeless, living on the streets and living in shelters and living outside, was for about a period of 8 months. But there's been 2 stints of homelessness in my life. And that's not due to my family's lack of willingness to help me and things like that. I came from a very good home. They were just completely, utterly lost on what to do to help me. Because if treatment was the answer, I would have got sober at 32 and I would have stayed sober. The reality is treatment is where we go to get the information. It doesn't keep us sober. There's only one thing that'll keep a drug addict clean and or an alcoholic sober, and that's living in recovery. Either you're in recovery or you're not in recovery, and that's part of my story as well. If I work a recovery program, I can stay sober. I came to Together We Can as a client, and I left for a period of time and worked out in the community. I report directly to a guy by the name of Stacey Wilson. He's got over a decade of sobriety and is a very successful businessman. He too is a recovered alcoholic, a recovered addict. He's the man I emulate my life after, and he's changed my life, to be honest with you, and he's gave me an opportunity to work here. My title is called Intake Services Manager, and Together We Can is a business of a nonprofit. Falls under the category of a society. Stacey reports with our controller to a volunteer board that is made up essentially of some pretty successful businessmen, the majority of them being in recovery as well. Our mandate is to help men and families that suffer from addiction. We're entering into a program with the BCHL. That's a program called Talk Today. We're going to sponsor the BCJHL. And, it's about mental health and addiction. And so we'll be talking to all the junior hockey teams in British Columbia about addiction. I told you about a young man by the name of Nathan McMaster. And I'm not breaking Nathan's anonymity because he knows I'm talking about him, but we've also helped other people that have been hockey players and things like that, football players, musicians, pretty high-profile people. Nathan, too, has a similar story to me, but the big difference between Nathan and myself, he's half my age. And it excites me when somebody that half my age can get this and live a life differently and live a life in sobriety, as opposed to going through all the things that I went through. To be honest with you, it might be hard to believe. My problem's not drugs and alcohol. It never truly was, to be honest with you. My problem is my coping skills and living life. Alcohol and drugs were my solution. The disease of addiction is truly a mental illness. The disease centers in the mind because we can get people stopped, and it's not willpower. It's not a behavioral problem, and it's not a moral problem. There's a lot of misconceptions about addiction. My problem today is not drugs and alcohol. It's living life just like all the other problems that other people have with life. So in my case, essentially when I left home to play hockey, that's when it really started snowballing at 15. And I found it quite confusing. I did.
A lot of people will deny that there's a problem. How do you recognize it if you're an individual who could have a problem?
That's a great question. And how do you know you have a problem? Because awareness is the first thing. And in looking back, it's easy to look back and to say that I was different than others because I was. And every junior hockey team I played on, there was about 4 or 5 guys. They were the party guys, right? And they were the guys that drank. And I sought those guys out on the team and stuff like that. I did. But I didn't realize it then. Even through my 20s, I eventually went into business and I went into sales. It was part of the culture. Right? And there was a lot of fun. I became successful at different things. When did I really recognize I had a problem? I never really truly wanted to stop drinking. That's the truth. It was other substances that the consequences got worse and worse and worse. I wanted to be able to drink or, in my case, use cocaine without consequences, and that was impossible. It's a progressive illness, so it gets worse. In my case, I had to be annihilated over and over again in order to become teachable. It took a long time. I think families today, through education, they need to be educated on seeing signs and individuals and things like that. And I'm really excited about this program, about going around and talking to junior hockey players and their families and things like that. We're going to be at the showcase event in Chilliwack. But getting awareness out there, talking about it, is the first step.
The company is Together We Can. Is that also the slogan?
Well, it is, and it's true. Together We Can, Addiction and Recovery and Education Society. Just Google Together We Can Vancouver or twcvancouver.org if they want to check out our website. You can't really go anywhere in recovery in British Columbia without having somebody from Together We Can present. And there's rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, rooms of CA and everything else. And, all through the province of British Columbia, there'll be people that have attended Together We Can and have changed their lives. And that wouldn't have been possible without this facility.
Steve, we want to thank you for joining us.
I thank you, Rick.
All right. All the best in your continued recovery.
You bet. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.